All right. Welcome, everybody, to It's Not as Hard as You Think, grant writing for small shops and beginners. I'm Katie Collins. I'm the Director of Development at the Capital Center for the Arts. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I have been at the Capital Center for almost 16 years. I have been in development in New Hampshire, primarily in arts and culture, for over 30 years. And I've been grant writing for many of those 30 years. I'm pleased to have my partner in crime with me again today, co-presenting on this topic, Cassie Mason from the New Hampshire State Council on the Arts. If you want to introduce yourself, Cassie.
Sure. I'm Cassie Mason, and I serve as the grants officer at the New Hampshire State Council on the Arts. And I've been at the Arts Council since 2008.
Wonderful. So, you're here today because you want to learn about grant writing, and we're here to help you. So today we're going to cover in a very short period of time, preparing, writing, budgeting, and reporting on a grant. Whether it's your first grant, whether it's your 20th grant, whether it's your 100th grant, whether you have a staff of 50 or a staff of one or a staff of none, you should be able to walk out of this workshop with some really concrete tools that are going to help you find success in grant writing for your organization. The first step in that is getting ready. And I'm going to turn that back over to Cassie to walk you through those steps.
Thanks, Katie. So, in preparing to write your grant as a funder, I think it's important for everyone to understand that funders want you to be successful. We want our money out in the community, and we want to fund projects that are going to be successful and have an impact in the community. To start, if you've never written a grant before, I think the first thing you should do is think about your project as it relates to the application. Is it a new project? Is it an ongoing project that maybe you want to amp it up a little or add some stuff to it? Once you have that written down, or if you've thought about it, you can then start to research your funders. There are a lot of ways that you can research your funders, and I think we have a handout in our resources for that. But some of the ways that I would suggest you research your funders are to look at their website and see what kind of projects they've funded before. Try to determine if your organization has received a grant from the funder before. Is there anyone on the staff that maybe you know, or know somebody that you know that you maybe could talk to about previous applications that they've funded? Once you have the opportunity to research your funder and you're looking at an application, I would strongly suggest that you read it thoroughly, make any highlights or notes that you have questions about, and then read it again at a later date, just to when you have a fresh set of eyes to be able to look at it. As you go through, make sure that you make a list of questions that you have that will come in handy later if you need to talk to the program person. Make a list of any required attachments. And as Katie will probably say, she keeps a folder on her desktop of all the common attachments for grant writing that she updates annually, so she has them right on hand. And one of the things that I've learned recently is for online applications, if you have an account that's for your organization, please remember to save your username and password, just in case somebody else needs to access the application online. Other tips that you could that I can offer you are to read any annual reports they put online. Katie, do you want to talk about the building relationships with the funders?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really important to get to know your funders as people as well as organizations. Get to know your program officer. When you're at an event, make sure you try to say hello to them, seek them out, make sure they know who you are. Build relationships with trustees of the foundations you might be talking to. because at the end of the day, it's going to be a gift, a grant from a foundation, but your relationship with the foundation starts with your relationship with the people who work there. And I think the best way to approach this is to know that program officers really want you to succeed. Cassie and I started out as her being my program officer. She's still my program officer at the Arts Council, but we've gotten to know each other over the decade plus that we've been working together on grants from the Capital Center to the Arts Council. And we have a really good understanding of what each other does and our strengths and where we need help. And so I never hesitate to reach out with some questions to her. So it's really important to start that relationship building.
And I can offer some suggestions for questions that program officers get a lot are, do you think this project would be a good fit for this particular grant program? Or is there another grant program that I should be looking at? Can operating costs be included in this project grant budget? What are the reporting requirements, which we'll talk about later? And how often do you meet to review the grants? And a question that I get a lot is, when is my check coming?
The important one.
Yes.
A couple of pro tips as you're getting ready and starting to think about your grant. Assume that the person reading or reviewing your application will know nothing about your organization and may not even know anything about New Hampshire. I know that a lot of foundations have in-house readers, but there are foundations who bring readers in from out of state, from out of the area of your community, because they want really fresh eyes looking at these grants. So don't assume that your funder has the same base of knowledge that you have about your organization and about the community you operate in and the needs of that community. And another great way to build that relationship with your funder and get to know them better is make sure you're signed up for any e-newsletters they send out. Make sure you have their websites bookmarked and you check it every once in a while for updates. Make sure you follow them on social media. Every good funder these days has a Facebook account, an Instagram account, a Twitter account. Pick your poison, but make sure you're following them, because you're going to get a really good idea of where their trends are going in grant making and where their priorities are. And it's an easy way to start building that relationship with them. So you've prepared, you've talked to your program officer, and now you're ready to start writing. And I'm here to tell you that grant writing is not anything you should be scared of. It is not intimidating. It's really just good, basic, persuasive writing. It's nothing to be nervous about. As Cassie said, the single most important thing you can do is understand the flow of the entire grant. Read the whole proposal, start to finish. Most proposals these days are online. You'll have an online portal you're working off of. It's really important to note that a lot of funders will have tabs across the top of your portal with the next set of requirements for your proposal. They may be labeled narrative, attachments, financials. Look at every tab. Make sure you know exactly what is coming down the pike for you, because the last thing you want is for it to be the day the grant is due and you look up and you see 3 tabs you haven't clicked through while you've been writing away at the narrative. So really make sure you take the time to look at all of that. Once you've looked at the whole flow of what the grant is asking, think of how you can divide up the work. And now I know this is a workshop for small shops. I was a one-person shop for a lot of years. I was a two-person shop for a lot of years. We don't always have the luxury of dividing up work. But if you do, think about who in your organization or on your board can be helpful. For example, if there are questions about the finances of the organization, can your director of finance or your accountant help you with that? If you're looking for money for a capital need and there are questions about your building or your physical plant, can the person on your staff who works in facilities help you with that? Now, they may not be writers, and that's okay. When I divide up a grant and I push some of these sections out to my coworkers, I always say to them, my job is to make it pretty. Your job is just to give me the words, because they will have the words that you may not, for talking about areas that are beyond your scope of expertise. once you've farmed out who can give you what, who can get you what, your finance person is working on the budget and you're ready to start writing, it's really important for me, and you can do differently, but for me, I look through that grant and I pick the question I know I can answer like that. And I write that answer first because that's going to get your juices flowing. It's going to get you in the zone of the grant. It's going to get your confidence up. There's no rule that says you have to start with question one and write through straight through to the end. It's perfectly legitimate to start with question five if you know you've got question five ready to roll and at your fingertips. So find the way that you're going to be able to move through it the easiest. Write your answers in Word if it's an online proposal and save them, save them, save them, save them. Make sure you know if the funder is asking you for a character count limit or a word count limit. They are two very different things. And that has bitten me more times than I can tell you. Even I fall prey to that pitfall. So I like to always keep checking my word count, so I'm not caught at the end trying to cut down a verbose answer to 500 words. One of the best things you can do when writing a grant, and a lot of you are going to say, I'm not a writer, I'm not good at writing, it's hard for me. That's understandable. It's not everybody's strength. But one of the best tricks I can tell you to make your writing instantly better is to go through it and eliminate any use of, or not any use, but a lot of the use of the passive voice. Is, am, are, was, were, are being, any sentences that are like that, and see if you can make them active sentences. For example, instead of saying, the Capital Center for the Arts is a leader in the state's arts and culture industry, I might say the Capital Center for the Arts leads the arts and culture sector in New Hampshire by. I've instantly made it active. I've instantly made it a more interesting sentence. And you'll see in our handouts, I've got a list of some fabulous active verbs that you could pick from. But it is a really great tip and it'll really elevate your writing to the next level. Avoid jargon. If you're going to use acronyms, define them the first time you use them. If you're going to use phrases that are unique to your sector, define them the first time you use them. I don't work in social services, so don't assume that, that everybody is going to understand the words that you use in your work in social services or in the environment or in healthcare. You may not understand the words I use working in the performing arts. So really, again, go back to that assumption that your audience does not know anything about your sector and define your terms so you're not leaving them scratching their heads, wondering what you're talking about. Be specific. Tell the funder how you're going to use this money, what it's going to help your organization do. Avoid things like, this will help us grow. Well, grow how? Are you going to serve more people? Are you going to open another shelter? Are you going to foster out 100 more dogs? Whatever it is, are you going to save 20 more acres of trees? Be specific about what the grant is going to help you do. That specificity is going to come in handy in the evaluation section. My least favorite section, the section I always save to last, the section that always ties me up in knots, because it's hard sometimes to quantify how this grant is going to help your organization. But spend time on that. Funders really want to know you're going to have a way to measure whether your program worked, whether their dollars made a difference. And be specific with that. Be reasonable with that. If you currently serve 100 after school snacks to this kids in this program every month, and their grant is going to help you serve 150, that's a reasonable goal and an easy thing to measure. So really think about how you can measure your success. Finally, before you hit submit, and trust me, hitting submit is a terrifying moment in any grant writer's life. Print your grant out, give it to somebody who has never seen it before. Give it to somebody who has never heard about your program before, and ask them two things. Ask them to proofread it, because spell check and grammar check only go so far. Have them look for misplaced commas and extra spaces and words that may be a actual word, so spell check didn't catch it, but it wasn't the word you meant to have in that sentence. And then also ask them if the grant makes sense. this is a really good way to know if it's going to make sense to your funder. And there, you've written a grant.
Okay, more pro tips. A lot of times, not only is the application submitted online, but it's also reviewed online. And so that's a question you can ask a program person. If the application is going to be reviewed online, can you include links in your narrative, in your writing, for the evaluators to click through to? This is a really useful tool for evaluators, especially if they're reading a lot of grants. So my suggestions would be, don't use too many links. Don't put a link on every line, and make sure whatever you link to is actually relevant and current, that it's not broken, that the link works, and that the information is not 15 years old. If you have the opportunity to create a connection between the criteria that the evaluators are going to be using to evaluate your grant and the answers that you've put in your narrative, it makes it a lot easier for evaluators to connect the dots, because they will be reading a lot of applications. And if they don't read a lot of applications, they're going to be discussing a lot of applications. In some situations, if you get a pool of 15 grant applications, you may be assigned to read 5 of them in detail, but you still have to discuss the remaining 10 if it's reviewed as a group. So that's those pro tips. So this is a question that I get a lot, and it's I when I just heard Katie say that she hated evaluation the most, I was thinking she really hated budgeting the most. So not everybody likes math. Even I don't like math, depending on the day. So when you get to the budget, you usually have a form that is supplied by the funder. And the reason that you have that form is because they want evaluators to be able to compare apples to apples. And if everybody's budget looks different, it makes it more difficult for the evaluators to understand the project income and expenses. So if you have a common form, that just makes it easier for the evaluators, which really you want to make it easier for the evaluators to understand. Understand the terminology. What are expenses? Those are the things that you're paying for as part of your project. And sometimes they're broken out as direct and indirect. Indirect expenses are the things that you would usually pay for even if you weren't doing the project, like rent and heat or utilities or staff expenses. And the direct expenses are those things that are directly related to whatever project you're applying for funding for. So maybe materials, maybe an independent contractor, somebody who's not typically on staff. Income and revenue are the money that's coming into your project. There's usually a section for the amount of the grant you're going to request, and then things like in our world, admissions, or in some places tuition, or maybe sales of like swag, t-shirts or concessions, that kind of stuff. In kind are those things that get donated. So different from expenses and income, because those things are usually cash, either in one form or another. The in-kind are things that no cash is exchanged. So volunteer time, or things that are donated maybe for a sale. Those things are in-kind. Understanding fiscal years is really important. Sometimes, most of the time, a fiscal year for a funder is a calendar year, January to December. But for some places, like for the federal government, it's October 1st to September 30th. For the state of New Hampshire, it's July 1st to June 30th. So getting a sense of what their fiscal year is will help as you plan out your budget and your cash flow. Another great question for a program officer is, are there sample budgets that you can look at? For my programs at the state of New Hampshire, we actually allow applicants to submit a draft narrative, any of their writing, and a draft budget up to 2 weeks before our deadlines. And I'm surprised at how many people don't take advantage of that. So if you're a first time grant writer and you're able to submit a draft of everything, take the program people up on that. They're the people who have the experience and can give you some really good feedback on, what you might do to strengthen your grant application. If you have the opportunity to do a budget narrative, I would suggest that anything that might be misunderstood, or there might be a question, like for instance, if you have funds that are restricted to a particular thing, you might want to explain that in the budget just to make sure that it's clear for someone, again, who may not be familiar with your organization. And we've already touched on attachments. I'm sure Katie has a file on her desktop for budget attachments as well. A lot of times that's either a profit and loss spreadsheet or it's an audited financial, depending on the size of your organization.
Current operating budget, that's another big one. You'll always
Yes.
ask for. Some more pro tips. Don't use strange programs. This can be hard. I am a Mac person at home and a PC person at work. And so sometimes things don't talk to each other, but try to stick to really standard programs. Word, PDFs, Excel, put your photos as JPEGs, like try not to do any kind of weird uploads that are going to be hard for the funder to open. That seems really obvious, but you would be surprised. And use evaluation methods, back to evaluation, that are appropriate for the people you're serving. So, think about your audience, your constituents, who is taking advantage of your programs, and think about the best way to tie your evaluation back to those people. Always bring it back to who you're serving and why, back to your mission. So, reporting. You've gotten the grant. Hooray! Good job. Guess what? You get to report on it a year out. If you have a multi-year grant, you might get to report on it twice, once in the middle of the grant and once at the end of the grant. So it's really important to know what your reporting requirements are. And most of the time, those requirements will come with your congratulations, you got the award notification, whether that's a letter or an email. And it's really easy in the excitement of the moment of knowing you got the grant to completely lose those attachments, to forget about them, and just go on with your life because you've got the money. But you really don't make that mistake. Don't lose sight of those reporting requirements. Oftentimes, if you're, again, back to these grant portals, a lot of times the grant award, once it's recognized in your portal as being awarded, you'll see another tab pop up for reporting, and there will be a reporting outline in there. So, check in on your portal every once in a while. Look for that reporting outline. Look at when it's due. Put reminders in your calendar a month before it's due, 2 weeks before it's due, a week before it's due. It's really easy to lose sight of reporting because getting the grant is the fun stuff. Reporting on it can be kind of cumbersome and onersome, but reporting on your grant is the first step to asking for the next one. Just like a thank you letter is the first step to asking a donor for their next gift. So it's really important that you give it as much weight as you do the grant narrative. Again, same thing. Look at the report. Look at what they're asking. Look what the narrative is to the report. Who can help you with that? Look at what attachments they're going to ask for. It's pretty common that they'll go back to whatever budget you put in with your application and say, now report on that and show us what changed. How did the actual budget change from the one you sent us in your grant application? What did you use our money on? I'm writing one of those right now where we have a $6.9 million capital project, and I have to tell one funder where we used their $100,000. So, it can be challenging, but it's really important for your funders to know how their money was used. and be honest. Sometimes things don't turn out the way you envisioned. Sometimes they take a completely different path and you've got really wonderful outcomes that you never saw coming. Sometimes they take a completely different path and you're disappointed. It's okay to be honest. Don't try to cover up things that maybe didn't work as well as you wanted to. Tell the funder that. Say, we really thought this was going to work, but then this happened and we fell short and we only got to this, this part of our goal. That's okay. It's much better to be honest and to indicate that, you're not letting it stop you, that you've learned from this and you're ready to move on with your program in a different way than it is to try to dance around the subject and pretend everything turned out exactly like you envisioned it was going to, because no grant ever turns out exactly as we say it's going to in our application. So always be honest about that. So,
Okay, more pro tips. Please, please, please invite your funder to your event or project. Sometimes that gets overlooked. They want to go, they want to see you be successful. They want to see how their money is making an impact in the community. So please invite them to any event that you have. Save a copy of everything that you create, whether it's your narrative or your budget or photo documentation, your final report, because it may come in handy. You may be able to recycle it into your next grant or use some of the information if you're writing a different grant. And always ask for feedback. At our organization, we always give feedback regardless of whether or not a grant is awarded in order to help people be stronger grant writers. And so if you don't get feedback, ask for it. It's perfectly fine.
and if I can interject,
Of
asking for that
course.
feedback is another way to build your relationship with your program officer. That's how I built some of my relationships early in my career. I was not a successful grant writer out of the gate, but I swallowed my pride and I picked up the phone and I asked what I could do better. And that's how I started to build relationships with the people that were sitting, on the decision making side of the desk.
Yeah. And inviting them to the event too is also a way to build a relationship with
Absolutely.
them. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we want you to avoid all of these mistakes. Mostly, I want you to avoid the mistakes that I've made, all of which are on this page. Check your math, check it, check it, check it again. If it's in an Excel sheet, make sure the formulas are correct. Make sure that you've shown your budget to somebody who's never seen the budget before and have them add it up, but make sure things are adding up the way you want them to. A lot of us these days in this world of COVID-19 have been applying for federal assistance. This is where the devil is in the details in these federal grants, because if you misplace a decimal point for a comma, you can find your grant bumped completely out of consideration because they're, programs that are just running the numbers to figure out what your funding is going to be. So really, really, really make sure that your math is spot on, 100%, no errors. Follow instructions. If it's really simple, but do what they've asked you to do. You don't decide that you want to do things differently than this funder has asked, because they're holding the power right now, and it's really up to you to go along with the methods that they've laid out for themselves. They've put a lot of time and effort into their grant application process, so give them the respect of following these instructions. If they say that before you can apply you have to send in a letter of inquiry, send in a letter of inquiry. If they say before you can apply you have to create a profile in their funders portal, create a profile. Do everything they are asking you to do. Again, don't be vague. I've covered that in the writing section, but really be specific about your goals and what you hope the outcome will be. Just saying we want to be a stronger organization and help our community is delightful, but it's not specific enough for a funder to understand what you're going to be doing. And using too little detail. It's a lot of the same kind of thing. Get specific, get into the weeds with some of this stuff so that they really know what your project is going to do. Don't answer questions they don't ask. This goes back to not following instructions. Look at what they've asked and answer those questions. Don't decide that there should be more questions that they forgot to ask you that you want to answer. If you're mailing in a grant, which happens very rarely these days, but still does happen, the cover letter can be a nice place for that. If there's something you feel you've missed in the application, you can maybe work it into your cover letter. Sometimes a grant will give you a conclusion box that's kind of open-ended. That's a good place to work in some stuff. But be respectful that they're reading a lot of these too, so don't overwhelm them. Try not to repeat yourself to fill up space. If a funder says, this question is limited to 1,000 words and you come in at 750, that's fine. If you come in at 350 and you've answered the question, that's fine. 1,000 word limit doesn't mean you have to write 1,000 words. Sometimes brevity is better. More is not always better. Sometimes more is just more, and you end up repeating yourself or talking yourself into a corner. So really watch out for that. And finally, waiting until the last minute. It really will behoove you to stay on top of deadlines, to give yourself plenty of time. And my little secret is I always aim to submit a grant the day before it's due. I act like that day is the due date, the hard and fast due date. And that way, if I'm tripped up and I'm waiting for something at the last minute, I have a day's grace period. So, whatever you need to do to make sure you meet that deadline, find what works for you and stick to it. So you have some handouts that have been made available to you online. I just want to run through what they are for you. A lot of these are from a wonderful website at the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits called Nonprofit Next. I wrote some of these handouts, so I feel confident in sharing them with you. One is called Positioning Your Grant for Best Results. It's, again, a lot of the tips we've talked about, from research to getting to know your program officer to making that call to the foundation, really getting yourself ready to write a successful grant. Some tips for grant writing, which I also covered in my section. A sample grant budget breakdown, which, as Cassie did note, is one of my least favorite parts of grant writing. So I would pay a special attention to this handout. My wonderful, fabulous list of active verbs, which is one of my favorite tools in the world. I go back to this list all the time. And then finally, this is a really great list of grant writing websites and resources, everything from the Charitable Foundation and the Arts Council and New Hampshire Humanities to the Community Development Finance Authority, who gives wonderful grants through its tax credit program, grants.gov, which is the federal program, GuideStar, Philanthropy Massachusetts, places that have really great listings of foundations. You can spend a good amount of time mining through some of these websites and finding a foundation that works for you. So make good use of those handouts. I think they will be helpful to you. And finally, I think we want to make sure you join us on May 13th at 9:30 for our live Q&A. If you have a burning question that you want to ask us, Cassie and I will be here that day. Bring your coffee. I will certainly have mine. You will notice that our emails were right under both of our names on the introductory slide. If you can't make that Q&A session and you have a question you want to email either one of us, by all means, please do. I'm always happy to answer a question if I can. Any other last words from you, Cassie?
No, thank you. I hope we are within our time limit, and we hope to see you at our Q&A session.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.